Orlean, and salutations once again to all who care and dare to listen. I'm here today on the 19th of August, 2022, to say something about anger. And so I invite you, as I begin, to let two questions float in your mind. What does anger look like? What does anger sound like? You just keep those questions in the background as you listen to me. And by the way, about listening to me, I don't really do what I ought to do, I guess, in order to develop and build my channel. I don't look at analytics. I don't post tags, that sort of stuff. But occasionally I have looked at the analytics. And as I recall, there's a feature that shows listening time. And it also shows something like what is the average listening time or what percentage of each upload people listen to. Now, I may be mistaken, but it appears from reading that analytics, which I've glanced at a couple of times, that some who come here and click on this channel don't listen to the talks to the end. So here's what I have to say to you, if you happen to be one of those people. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you live. I don't know how you look. I don't know how you smell. But I can tell you up front that if you don't have the courage and determination to listen to what I say to the end, don't listen at all, don't come here at all, and fuck off. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Speaking of anger, the use of the F word. Now, sometimes when you say F off, it's humorous and playful. You say it to a friend, you both laugh. But very often, the F word is used to express anger, isn't it? I mean, in some instances, in some situations, if you say to someone, get the fuck out of here, that's a threat. That's an expression of anger. And I wonder if you've ever considered why that word, the F word, would have a charge of anger attached to it. After all, basically, it is common slang for the act of sexual intercourse. And in my view, you may agree, anger has no place in the act of sexual intercourse. It's an act of devotion, tenderness, maybe even a kind of worship. But certainly there's no place for anger in the performance of that act. And yet, the word that denotes that act is often used for expressions of anger. Curious, isn't it? Anyway, I have a disclaimer before I begin this talk. And by the way, this is not a Nematta preview. It's not 15 minutes of a longer unit on Nematta. It's a complete talk. And so you would do well to listen to the end, unless you want to be witness to my anger. I feel anger when things displease me. I like to be pleased. I don't like to be displeased. And I don't tolerate anyone in my presence who doesn't show courage and determination at the core of their being. I look for that. And when I don't see it, I'm displeased. And when I'm displeased, anger comes up. If you want to know the brutal truth, or even if you don't, I do not consider anyone who does not solidly hold courage and determination in their character to be worthy of my presence. And when I speak to you here, when you hear my recorded words, you are, in a sense, in my presence. So my disclaimer concerns this stupid, dumb notion that you often hear about so-called negative emotions, namely anger and hatred. And I'm sure you've heard people say and insist, oh, no, 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 you must not allow those emotions to come into your field because they're bad. And if you feel them, they will harm others and they will harm you. And only bad can come from feeling anger and hatred. I had a conversation yesterday with a woman when the subject came up. Good conversation. I enjoyed it. It pleased me. And she asked me, well, what about hate? Do you feel hate and anger? Do you feel those emotions? And I said, name an emotion that I don't feel. I feel all emotions except two. One is resentment and the other is envy. So I want to tell you at the outset that if you have a filter that gives you a view that affects your view of anger and hatred in such a way that you reject those emotions and you consider them to be wrong and unacceptable, then there's probably no point in listening to the rest of what I have to say. Now, as I said, this is not a Nemitta preview, but it is, in a way, a preview of something that you find on Nemitta if you're on the faculty. So additional to the 16 or 12 main courses and the 3 long-term courses or vocations, there is a feature called the Terma and the Turton, that's number 17, and another feature called Breaking News. Terma and the Turton is a place where I share and discuss certain intimate details of my life, my mystical adventures, and everything that is relative to the Terma of Gaia awakening, of which I choose to speak in a private and intimate way to certain friends and allies. Feature 18, Breaking News, contains a kind of monthly report. You see, one of the practices of planetary Tantra is to follow the lunar cycles. So each month, when a new lunar cycle begins, I post a unit called the Dakini Weather Watch. And we are now at number 51. So since the inception of Nemitta in September of 2018, I have posted 51 units that correspond to the lunar cycles over that 4-year period. And this activity, this exercise, really brings unity and confidence to those who practice PT. You see, we consider that the moon is a signal mechanism, a transmitter. And so each month, people all around the world, in New Zealand, Australia, in South America, in Brazil, Colombia, in Mexico, Canada, the United States, and across Europe, all wait for the moment when they can see the first crescent after sunset, the sunset crescent. That is the signal of the beginning of a new lunar cycle, which we call a Dakini shift. So the system of planetary Tantra teaches that there are 16 discrete frequencies that come from the earth, some of them from the earth and some of them from the atmosphere. And these frequencies are all expressions of the life, emotion, intelligence, and intention of the aeonic mother, the planetary animal mother. So what we do, quite simply, is we tune into her frequencies all together. And since over the course of time, I have been able to define and describe these frequencies, we recognize them by themes. There is a theme, a mood, and there are specific instructions that come from the aeonic mother each month. And we track these transmissions by following the cycles of the moon. For instance, Dakini Weather Watch 51, which is current, presents the opportunity to attune to the frequencies of Bhairavi. Bhairavi. It's a Hindu Sanskrit word which means the terrible one, also known as Sekhmet from Egypt, and Balaam, the jaguar, from the Aztec and Maya cultures. Each of these Dakinis, or Devatas, as they're also called, by the way, Devata means an emanation, a radiation. Each of them can be correlated to a certain mythical animal or some other kind of supernatural agency, you see? And this identification and designation is precise and consistent over time. So in this way, practitioners of PT learn to recognize these frequencies, which are subliminal. They're actually operating in your minds right now. They are channels that are broadcasting in your mind subliminally. But due to the subtlety of the transmissions and due to the velocity of these frequencies, which are all under around 30 hertz, they are subvocal and they are impossible to detect unless you are trained in how to detect them. And this indeed is what we do. So Bhairavi, the lion power of the planetary animal mother, is the dominant frequency for this month. So we say the shift goes to Bhairavi. I want to specify that all of these transmissions from the living planet to the human animal and to other animals as well are constantly active. All of them, all 16. But of course, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to read them simultaneously. So you have to break them down. But as a matter of fact, Sophia herself does that. So even though she's constantly broadcasting on all frequencies, and you can pick up any one of the 16 at any time, she arranges it according to the cycles of the moon so that there is one dominant frequency every 29-day period. Planetary Tantra comes into the world with a range of specific terms. It has its own terminology, and at first sight, this terminology may appear to be obscure or off-putting. But as a matter of fact, a closer investigation shows that the terms in use are simple, elementary, and extremely precise. And they are also user-friendly. For instance, the correct term for attunement to the telluric radiations of the Earth under 30 hertz is called transception. Transception means the capacity both to receive and to transmit. So at any moment, you as a human animal are in the field of life forces of the Earth. and the earth transmits to you, you receive, and you in turn can learn how to transmit what comes to you from the source of life itself, the immediate source. Now, over the years, I've developed quite an inventory for each Dakini shift. The inventory lists, as I said, the theme, the mood of the shift, and the instructions that come subliminally, which are specific to the Dakini or Devata overseeing the shift. I mentioned that there are now 51 units on Nimitta for the months proceeding from September 18th. And I estimate that if that material were printed out, it would perhaps run to a 400 or 500 page book. So in this practice, we are continually reminding ourselves of and mastering the signatures of these Dakini frequencies and incorporating them into language and into our bodies. And at the same time, we are continually developing and expanding and enlarging knowledge of what these frequencies are and how we can define them and integrate them so that they become forces added to your life force. And this is how you receive and transmit the boost of the earth, as Castaneda called it. If you're wondering how this actually works, I'm tempted to offer a really trivial example. It's fair to say that wherever you might be, home, in your car, in a bar, in a restaurant, and the music plays the song Yesterday by the Beatles, it's fair to say that within a matter of seconds, upon hearing the bars of that music, say it's simply an instrumental version played on the piano, you immediately recognize what the song is. Exactly so. In this practice, you can come to immediately recognize the frequency signatures radiating from the body of the planet. One of the ways of identifying these frequencies is by what can be called archetypal images. I myself do not use that term. But animals, obviously, such as the bull, that would be the frequency of two Devatas, one being Tara, or the wrathful green Tara, and the other being Bhudevi. The instructions for practicing planetary Tantra include a graphic display of the 13 constellations in the sky. Now, not all of these constellations are animals. I've talked about this before. Some of them are human figures, like the twins or the virgin. Some of them are hybrids, like the goatfish or the archer, half man, half horse. So there is a variety of archetypal imagery, if you will, in the constellations of the zodiac. And each month, the signature of the overseeing Dakini connects to one of those constellations. So you can actually go out and visualize how this happens. And so you are not only listening inwardly for the signature, the clue to the Dakini emanation that is reaching you, but you are also scanning the sky, the cosmic environment, and tracking it in the sky, as well as tracking it by what is called mantik. Mantik in planetary Tantra means divination. So there are many instances shared among Shaktas over the years of how at the beginning of a shift, or at some point, full moon, last quarter moon, sunrise crescent, at some point in the cycle, the observer would receive an omen in the form, say, of the visit of an owl or of a dragonfly, which is associated with the constellation of the twins. And so the full spectrum experience of transceiving these telluric frequencies, do you follow me, is quite spectacular. And it's not merely an intellectual process by any means. It comes into definition intellectually, but it is largely an intuitive and imaginative process of divination, mantique. I've said before, and I'll say it again, that spirituality is worthless, and I don't use that term. The true, genuine, provable spirituality is the art of divination. Can you divine the signals and omens that arise in your own psychic life? And can you divine, likewise, the signals and omens that come to you through nature? That is mantique. That can be proven. It's not some airy-fairy, make-believe concept of what it means to be spiritual. You have to prove that you have mantique. And if you ask me how anyone would want to prove that they're spiritual, I have to say, I don't have the faintest idea. And I don't care. Slight digression there. Let's return to the current shift of Bhairavi. I believe the correct pronunciation puts the accent on the first syllable. So what are the themes? What are the lessons? What are the moods of Bhairavi? Well, rage. How about that? Rage, like the rage of stampeding elephants, the rage of a striking cobra, the rage of predatory birds, the rage of vultures. You see? This is a quality of Bhairavi which you can actually feel in yourself if you are open to the necessity and integrity of all emotions without judgment. What is to be judged is how you act on those emotions. But the emotions themselves cannot be judged. They are as inherent to your existence as enzymes and neurotransmitters in your brain and hemoglobin in your blood. They are as essential to you as those factors of physical existence. So it can be said that Bhairavi represents the rage of Gaia, Sophia, the rage of the planetary animal mother. And it is an animal rage, and she is an animal. But she is not human. Now it so happens that these epiphanies, to use the formal term, of Sophia often take theriomorphic forms, meaning animal forms. So in one sense, and it's really important to know this for grounding in planetary Tantra, what I'm calling the Dakini frequencies of the animal mother have been called in many native and indigenous traditions animal powers. Now, this issue of animal powers is a very big deal in shamanism. You may know this. And very often, there was a standard, for instance, among the native tribes of North America and also South America and every other place you can mention, but particularly in North America, there was a standard for the vision quest. And one of the goals of the adolescent going out into the wilderness on the vision quest was to encounter his or her power animal. So these frequencies are expressions of your power animal, but they only work if you identify your power animal. You need to claim it. You need to recognize what is your power animal. So Bhairavi is an extremely important power animal in planetary Tantra. What are some other themes or signatures of her transmission? Well, the protection of territory, the claiming and protection of your territory. Look at the way non-human animals behave. They all have their territory. The wolves, the giraffes, the wildebeest, the elephants. And to some degree, due to the miracle of symbiosis, which is due to the intercession of the symbiont, an important chapter in the fallen goddess scenario, the boundaries of their territories may overlap. And so you have interspecies relations, you see? But fundamentally, each animal, whether it be a gorilla or a monarch butterfly or a spider, a black widow, has its own territory. The territorial imperative is a theme of Bhairavi, claiming and holding your territory, which in terms of the social order and the behavior of the human animal means private property. Or if not that, it means the property you inhabit for which you are responsible to preserve and respect. Territorial imperative is also the title of a book by an ethologist named Robert Ardrey. And in that book, Ardrey describes in beautiful writing many of his experiences in Africa where he was able to observe directly, without interfering, the territorial behavior of many different animals. But Ardrey also considers something called the homing instinct. He gives the example, this doesn't come from Africa, of Atlantic turtles who swim back and forth across the Atlantic. In order to lay their eggs, they follow a migratory cycle like many other animals. And very often that migratory cycle, by the way, is either directed by the moon or by the geomagnetic currents of the earth, if not by both. So the Atlantic turtles can swim from the coast of Europe all the way across the Atlantic to the coast of South America, and they find their way back to the very same beach on that vast coast where they laid their eggs in the previous cycle of migration. That is called the homing instinct. It begs the question, well, is there a homing instinct in the human animal? Well, you bet there is, and it's one of the sources of great despair and desperation among many people today. I know this firsthand. People are asking the question, well, where do I belong? You say. And so the homing instinct is a theme of Bhairavi. That's 2, right? I have a list of about 10 here, but I'll just name one more because it's relevant to this talk. Sacred anger. Now, what is sacred anger? What do you suppose that might be? How would it differ from ordinary anger? Well, picture this. Suppose you went around the world, whether you be a man or a woman, and on your belt you had a knife, a serious-looking knife, an instrument for killing. And suppose that knife, obviously, could be just stuck into your belt, but suppose that it's carried in a sheath. That's the proper way to carry a knife, or a samurai sword in a sheath. So you have on your hip a lovely artifact. It's a leather sheath. Maybe you burned some words or symbols into it. Maybe it's decorated. It ought to be an object of beauty. And it's yours. It identifies you as the owner of that blade, you see? So as long as the blade is in the sheath, that's personal anger. It's your personal possession. But the moment the blade comes out of the sheath, it's not just personal anymore. And that's where sacred anger, that's the moment when sacred anger comes into play. Now, the word sacred can be equated with the word consecrated. In fact, the root of sacred is in that word. So sacred anger is consecrated anger. But the question is, of course, to what is it consecrated? This is an issue of Bhairavi. This question is an issue which comes up. It may come up at any moment in your life, and it may come up in a really serious moment. But it comes up strongly with the prevalence of the frequency of Bhairavi, generally in the summer of each year. So let's see. At this point, the 30-minute mark, how about if I direct your attention back to those two questions I proposed? How does anger look? How does anger sound? And I'll add a third question. How does anger feel? Now, one of the problems with anger, which causes people to fall into that stupid and irresponsible position of categorically rejecting it along with hatred, is that the human animal naturally tends to look to behavior, one's own behavior and the behavior of others, to determine and to evaluate certain concepts, you see? So if you have the concept of independent, then you can look around and you can see who among your friends and associates you would consider to be, hey, he's independent. Hey, she's a free spirit. You see it in the behavior. The behavior is the mirror of the definition. Otherwise, the definition is worthless. It's an abstraction. And we don't do abstractions in planetary tantra. So, what does anger look like? Well, let me give you one illustration that comes from my personal experience. When I lived in New York City in 1967, I had an apartment in a shabby tenement building on Avenue B and 11th Street. And it was a typical block in a very rundown, lower class area of New York at the time. And when you came to the building, you would have the stoop. There were 4 or 5 stairs that led up to the first floor, and I would go in, I would go up the stairs, turn, and go to my apartment, which faced on the street. Now, it so happens, standing in front of the stoop of 144 Avenue B, you would see a storefront. Very often on the ground level or a little below it, there were storefronts. And they were not meant to be places for people to live, but they were meant for businesses. So on the right of the stoop, there was a storefront, but it was in a mess. It was derelict. There was a huge panel of plywood across what otherwise would have been the display window. And there was a doorway into the inside, which was a mess. Now, often when I left or returned to my apartment, I would encounter the individual who occupied that storefront. And his name was Jeff. So I'm about, 22. He's about the same age. And he's coal black. And he has a pockmarked face and very short, tight, kinky hair. Now, Jeff had a mission in life. I don't think that I heard it from him, but I might have. But I heard it from others in the neighborhood, which was that he intended to take that storefront and dedicate it as a community center for the promotion of the works of Malcolm X. Now, if you don't know who Malcolm X is, he was a radical black figure of the 60s, and he was a Marxist, and he was someone who back in those days, I'm talking about the mid-60s, had no problem whatsoever in openly condemning the white races as demons and calling for their extermination. So Jeff was a devout follower of Malcolm X. Now, I was ready, willing, and able to talk with Jeff at any time, but something about his composure when I used to pass him, when I used to meet him on the street, convinced me that he was not receptive to having a dialogue. And as a matter of fact, the main way that Jeff communicated to me was through his look, his bodily posture, and the look on his face. And I can remember as clear as it happened, as if it happened yesterday, that he would be standing there in the doorway, leaning against it. And when I came home to go up the stoop, if I glanced at him, he looked back at me with an expression of brutal, glaring anger. That's how anger looks in some cases. Yes, it can look ugly. It can be ugly. Think of bar fights. There are expressions, overt expressions of anger, which are extremely ugly and nasty and threatening. And I've seen them in my life, and I've encountered them more than once. So how does anger sound? Well, go listen to a speech by Malcolm X, or go look at a few clips of Antifa fanatics. Generally, it sounds pretty harsh. You see people waving their arms, giving the fist of power to the people. What a joke that is. And screaming insults and screaming hate at other people. So there you have hate coming into the picture. So when you look around at the evidence of human behavior, there is no question whatsoever that anger and hatred come to expression in ugly and violent ways. And sometimes that goes to the extent of great harm, destruction of property, and murder. But is that all there is to it? Is there another way to hold and express anger? Well, if you would want to know, then you might consider putting yourself under the instruction of Vairavi. This is something that she teaches, how to own, hold, and express anger in a correct way, in an honorable and necessary way, so that what you express is more than something personal. You express sacred anger and the intentions behind it. Does that proposition interest you? Would you like to try? Or would you even care to consider what is sacred anger? Consider that it might be something important to your life morally, as well as something necessary for your physical survival and the survival of those you love, family and friends, and your beloved animals, and even the wild animals, and even the domestic animals, like cows, who are now facing threat of extermination in Holland as the globalists push their agenda. The agenda that drives their territorial imperative. And you can be sure of one thing, no matter how little you know about how these psychopaths operate, they intend to take everything from everyone and to make all territory their territory. And if you can't see that happening, you must be blind, deaf, and dumb. One of the themes of Vairavi, another theme, is intentional community. Ever heard that expression? It used to be quite popular. I haven't heard it in a while. It refers to self-sustaining communities and villages of people. An intentional community is the setting for a clan of people who share the same moral and material interests. One of Bhairavi's roles is to protect those clans that are now forming in Kali Yuga, forming by the association of people who seek refuge from the insanity of the world, of the social order, the corrupt social system. I could spend the remainder of this talk, which looks like it's going to an hour, but I make no excuses. I can't help myself. I want this message to be complete. I would like to turn to the wonderful subject, the thrilling subject of the predatory felines. Now, while it is true that Bhairavi comes into human imagination through the figure of the lion, in fact, all of the predatory felines of all species, and I think there are about 40, are epiphanies of Bhairavi. What can you make of the differences between these species? Difference, say, between a leopard and a mountain lion, a lynx and a Siberian tiger, a puma and a panther. Well, obviously, each of these species is beautifully and precisely designed. Their body weight, their morphology, their markings are all particular. Why are they so particular? Why do you see something when you look at a cheetah, the fastest animal on earth, by the way, and something different when you look at a cougar from the Rocky Mountains? Each of these animals has its territorial imperative, and it will defend with its non-human equivalent of anger. It will defend any violation of its boundaries. Can you do that? Can you defend a violation of your boundaries? So these animals have attributes that can be acquired by human animals. And when you look at them individually, one species at a time, and you contemplate how they look, how they behave, how they hunt, you are in fact placing yourself before Bhairavi in order to learn what she has to teach. There's a unique feature about Bhairavi among all the other devatas, all the other 16 telluric frequencies. She uses silence. The communication of Bhairavi is wordless, similar to the communication that you have with animals. If you were to meet an elephant and learn to know that elephant, and it would get to learn to know you, and it could even remember you 15 years later after you had not been in its life. Have you seen these scenes? Same with grizzly bears. Same with lions. Were you to acquaint yourself with a wild animal, you would do it largely wordlessly. They do have their language, and one can speak to them in an elementary way, but the true communication that occurs with animals is wordless, and this is the case as well with Bhairavi. One way to learn and absorb her instruction, again, is to look at the range of predatory felines. Now, what I'm going to say now is Bhairavi instruction coming from a human animal. But I wouldn't be able to put it into language and give it its proper force and bearing had I not absorbed it wordlessly. Remember, transception means to receive and to transmit. So although Bhairavi does not transmit through words and language, those who receive her instructions can then turn around and formulate them and communicate them to others. And that is exactly what I'm doing. And you will never hear anyone on the planet come close to what I'm going to tell you now. Sacred anger is not a force limited to your personal character and circumstances. It is a transcendent, superhuman force. And due to that being so, no human animal can hold and express sacred anger without connection to a power animal. And this is not merely a symbolic connection. It is not some kind of Jungian game of archetypal make-believe. Why are all the varieties of predatory felines, killers and hunters of high art, why are they so distinct in their markings and their bodily morphology? Each one of them offers the opportunity to see your capacity for sacred anger reflected in that animal. So you identify your power animal with a particular species. And if you identify it as a puma, it's quite different from identifying it as a leopard. And how would you know the difference? How would you ever possibly learn this in the way that I'm explaining it so that you can communicate in words what you received without words? You have to learn it viscerally. This knowledge is an instinct that runs in your blood. It is visceral, and it has to be owned, felt, and realized viscerally before you can express it in the way that I'm doing now. Hold on a moment. Parentheses. I suspect that some of you are wondering, well, hey, John, that's big talk. As usual, coming from you, no surprise. But what is your power animal? Would you like to know? My power animal is the Andean puma. But not just any Andean puma. There are certain of those animals, certain members who are female, who live alone and move in great stealth. They are almost impossible to find, like the snow leopard of the Himalayas. And they haunt the highest crags of the Andes Mountains, where it is so cold that the breath coming out of their nostrils crystallizes into sparkling droplets. The Andean puma has supernatural stealth, and it is a fact that photographers have spent years of their lives trying to film one. They know it's there. They know she's there. They see her tracks. They see the signs of her presence, but they can never find her. So you see, each one of these species of predatory felines has particular outstanding traits, and that is the trait that you would seek that corresponds to your commitment to hold sacred anger. So if your power animal happens to be bobcat, lynx, or leopard, you could only claim that as your power animal and develop a deep instinctual relationship to it by knowing what its unique attributes are and how those attributes are also your attributes if you are committed to hold and express sacred anger. It's not something that anyone can do on their own. You need your power animal your nahual, your animal double, as the counterpart so that you can hold that supernatural force. So, in concluding, I already described briefly the ugly, nasty behavior that occurs when certain human animals express hatred and anger. And of course, that gives those who wish to disown and reject those emotions a case for doing so. They say, I don't want to behave like that. I don't want to look like that. I don't want to sound like that, like a rabid Antifa fanatic or an SJW. Those are sick, rabid animals who express anger and desire, and you don't want to have anything to do with that, do you? And neither do I. But the good news is that you don't have to. But in order to get what I'm talking about, you need to be able to answer the third question. After how does anger look and how does anger sound, you have to ask, how does anger feel? How does it feel to hold the force of sacred anger in your body, balanced in equilibrium against the force of your power animal? How does that feel? It feels like a cold blade. Imagine a sword, a samurai sword, and it has a hilt and a blade. Well, imagine that the sword is buried in the earth. The hilt of the sword is in the earth, and only the blade stands vertically above the earth. That is how you stand when you own the force of sacred anger. The look of it is cold, sharp. It does not look angry and hateful in the way that those actions I've described do. It doesn't look that way at all. It looks clean and dispassionate, but it also looks dangerous. So, by way of transceiving Bhairavi instruction, I tell you that consecrated anger, which is beyond the personal, anger to protect all of life, the precious web of life, and to protect freedom, pleasure, beauty, truth, that anger is a standing blade inside your body. You know that iron is the metal of Kali, right? And there is iron in the hemoglobin in your blood. There's iron flowing in your blood right now. And when, by the force and intention of the planetary animal mother, using her Dakini frequency of Bhairavi, when she aligns those molecules of iron-bound hemoglobin in your blood, as if they were a vertical shaft, then you have sacred anger installed. And everything is material. It's a material fact that the bioelectric magnetic web of the earth, the electromagnetic field of the earth, does align the iron-bound hemoglobin in your blood. And so the presence of this sword, this vertical blade, is, in a sense, a material reality. Now, having taken all that on board, and of course, I've gone far too far in this one talk, but I can't stop until I reach the proper conclusion. And here it is. If you take on these characteristics, if you accept and consider these characteristics of sacred anger, it begs the question, well, if I had that, how far would I be willing to take it? How far would I be willing to go with it? You know, it's one thing to use anger in self-defense or in defense of others. But it's quite another thing to use it for lethal purposes. So what about going that far? How do you learn? How can you learn the instinctual laws of the blood that teach you when it is appropriate to use anger as a killing force? Well, you learn it from the most skilled killers on the planet. Can't you see that? Now, among these 40 species of predatory cats, there are two very special groups. One is the group of spotted animals, like the cheetah, and the other is the group of animals who are not spotted and who may be striped or have other markings. So if you find that your power animal is a spotted animal, then you would need to learn what are the characteristics of that particular feline. Now, there's more. What about those teardrop markings? You see, not all cheetahs, not all predatory cats have teardrop markings, but some do. And those that do run across the entire range of the 40 species. Now, when this signature of the teardrop markings occurs, you are looking directly at the high instruction of Bhairavi concerning how the human animal learns to kill its own kind. The teardrops are there to show you what you feel or what you don't have to feel on the occasion that you would ever have to kill your own kind in a conscious and deliberate expression of consecrated anger. It could be said that those animals with those glorious markings, which gives such pathos to their expression, they shed the tears that you don't need to shed. There's nothing to be sorry about. There's nothing to be sad about. They carry what could be the normal human feelings about killing one's own kind. They carry it for you. And so if it so happens that you come to realize in one way or another, and Goddess knows how you would do it, which power animal is yours, your double, your Nahual, then you would know if it has teardrop markings, you are in for the end game. Who hasn't heard the term natural selection? What I'm talking about here is supernatural selection. And that also is a theme of Bhairavi. Enough said. And I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come. And may you find your way to the beauty that kills.